So as Johan mentioned, my name is Erin Kim, and it's truly an honor to be here again representing New Harvest. For those of you who don't know us, New Harvest is a New York-based nonprofit that's accelerating breakthroughs in cellular agriculture. We're a very small organization of just 3 people who've been pioneering in this space since 2004. And the new field of science that we're currently building involves the production of agricultural products like meat, milk, eggs, and materials like leather, silk, and bone, but from the cellular level through biotechnology, whether that's through cell culture, fermentation, or other methods not involving whole animals. It's a subject that's been receiving an insane amount of attention in the past couple of years, mostly for its applications towards cultured or lab-grown meat. This is an emerging discipline which lies at the unlikely intersection of medicine and food science, using relatively recent advances in tissue engineering, or the growth of human tissues for medical use, and applying those principles, to growing proteins, cells, tissues, and molecular ingredients for food and other uses. Rather than sourcing these from whole animals, we can produce some of these by either employing yeast cells to produce them for us in the case of acellular products, or in cellular production by growing them cell by cell. And so things have gotten really interesting for us within the past 5 years or so, and so I wanted to give a little rundown of some of the key events that have happened since 2013. Starting with this image, which probably most of you are well familiar with now, Mark Post at Maastricht University in the Netherlands, he created a prototype of the world's first cultured beef hamburger. It was famously taste tested live on television at a high cost of 250,000 euros and many, many months of his team of lab technicians culturing each individual muscle fiber, of which there are 20,000 in the patty, by hand, and then coloring them red with beet juice. It didn't taste great, but it was a proof of concept. And the following year, in 2014, we saw the first few cellular agriculture food startups being founded. So the first, both of these were direct spin-outs of New Harvest, I should add. So the first was Moo-Free, which is now known as Perfect Day Foods. They're currently employing yeast fermentation to produce dairy milk proteins without cows. And Clara Foods followed that same year, and they're using the same methodology to produce egg white proteins without chickens. And as all of this was beginning to take hold in 2015, we realized that we needed an actual language to describe these processes and the new field and industry that was beginning to take shape. So the phrase cellular agriculture was coined on a New Harvest Facebook group discussion that year, and it emerged from just this tiny group of just a few hundred people in an online community to being used by international governments today, by NASA and the American National Academy of Sciences. So it's just really interesting to reflect on how prior to 2015, all this stuff, even if the idea existed, we didn't really have the terminology to describe it. And we did experiment with other phrases like the post-animal bioeconomy, which is just funny now to reflect on because it didn't really catch on like cellular agriculture did. And so from 2016 to the present, interest in cellular agriculture has just been steadily skyrocketing. The number of media articles about cultured meat in particular has really gone off the charts, and new startups continue to form at an accelerating pace from countries like the US and Canada, the Netherlands, the UK, and Japan and Israel, to name a few. And cultured meat has become by far the most hotly speculated application of cellular agriculture, and a research area that is still actually, believe it or not, after all these years and all of the excitement, still extremely neglected. It began to dawn on us at New Harvest that as this proto-industry was beginning to grow, what was needed before actual cultured meat products could even hit dinner plates or store shelves was an actual product pipeline. And the first step towards that pipeline is a foundation of openly accessible scientific research. So the remainder of my presentation is going to focus on what New Harvest is doing to address this. But what is the point of cellular agriculture? At this point, I think everyone in this room is now pretty familiar with the downsides of large-scale animal agriculture and just certain aspects of our food system that really are not great and could use some improving on. Cellular agriculture holds the potential of creating meat and other animal products, again, from cell cultures, not from whole living animals, and that suggests that we may someday be able to enjoy delicious, nutritious, and sustainable animal products, not just for consumption as food, but also in applications to materials, cosmetics, industrial ingredients, and all the way back to medicine. We hope that growing these proteins, cells, and tissues directly, rather than raising billions of animals for these purposes, will require less water and land usage, as well as give off fewer greenhouse gas emissions. Some researchers also believe that culturing meat directly from cells could also lead to a more nutritious and potentially customizable product. But it needs to be stressed that although these are very exciting and promising possibilities, all of the beneficial claims that are being made about cultured meat remain firmly in the speculative realm until there are tangible products that can be independently studied and not just prototypes. So as it stands today, there isn't yet enough evidence to really support whether or not the environmental and health benefits of producing meat in this way will actually be realized. And that's not to say that it won't happen, it just means that we just need more evidence. So if we're not quite at the stage of having products ready for the market right now, what exactly is the state of research today? Well, this might be easier to frame in terms of what we don't have, which includes, but is not limited to, a reliable, standardized source of cells. So whether that's according to species, so a particular type of cow, pig, chicken, or fish, and then down to the cell type. So meat, of course, is not just purely muscle, but it also contains fat and connective tissue and blood and other components. And furthermore, there isn't really an industry standard for what even defines a muscle cell as a muscle cell, rather than, for example, a cell that might differentiate into collagen. And because cells, they're designed to be inside an animal's body. And up until this point, they've never really been studied outside of that for food purposes, and so we're still looking at what exactly do these cells need, what waste do they produce, how do you keep them alive and keep them from dying, essentially. And of course, how to scale up production is a huge concern still. So we don't yet have a method of producing enough of these cells affordably and sustainably, even to produce a high-cost product, let alone one for mass consumption. So again, all of the publicly unveiled cultured meat prototypes thus far have been produced at a lab scale and not a commercial scale. More broadly speaking, we don't yet have a way for expertise specific to cultured meat to be generated in an openly accessible setting. We know that cellular agriculture is an interdisciplinary field that relies on collaboration between medicine, food science, and engineering. But there aren't yet any courses or degree programs being offered at a university level, and not even a textbook yet. At this stage, even academic and peer-reviewed scientific papers remain few and far between, and that sounds kind of alarming, but isn't actually that unusual considering how new this field is. And these are all areas that New Harvest is actively working to change through our research program. From a non-technical standpoint, we also don't know how will cultured meat actually taste. Once we're able to combine all of those components of meat produced from cell culture together into some kind of a product, will it actually taste as good as conventional meat, or could it even possibly taste better, or could it taste worse? We don't know yet. And of course, as others have mentioned, we don't know yet how cultured meat and other cellular agriculture food products are going to be regulated. So in the US, there is this conversation that's taking place where advocacy groups on both sides of the debate, both for cultured meat and against, are kind of beginning to try to influence how these products are going to be regulated. But because the nature of this field remains so highly speculative, and there are no products to regulate today, that's only time will tell how that will actually play out in the end. And of course, that's going to vary from country to country as well. And the million-dollar question still remains of when products actually will be available. So predictions actually have been made since even prior to Mark Post's burger, but they're still coming and going. And with so much of this company research happening behind closed doors, there are some very bold predictions being made, but still no products on the market yet today. So what's being done to address these unknowns? Well, scientifically speaking, at least, for the questions that can be asked with research, that's where New Harvest comes in. So our donor-funded research program funds an international network of scientists who otherwise would not be able to pursue this line of research without our grants. And we're creating a quite unusual atmosphere of openness and collaboration between these researchers who are sharing the ups and downs of their work with each other and with the public as it happens. And these fellows are also required to publish their work in open access journals, which is something that would basically never happen if this were a landscape that were made up of just companies. So having a nonprofit in this space that does not have a product to sell, I think is absolutely crucial for that and other reasons. So thanks to resources like our social media channels, our newsletter, and our donor updates, our community, which is a mix of scientists and non-scientists alike, investors, donors, prospective consumers, and even critics, meat eaters like myself, and vegans, we're all learning together about the very basics of cultured meat concepts, such as vascularization, which is the formation of blood vessels, which is necessary if we're ever going to produce cultured meat that has more of a steak or chicken breast-like texture. And so that image on the far right shows the beginnings of bovine angiogenesis, which is the formation of blood vessels in a cow and in culture. And the middle image shows some cultured pork muscle cells coming together, looking a little bit more like meat, but for reference, we also included this image on the left of meat bought from a store looked at under a microscope. And so taken together, these images show that although we're getting a little bit closer, there is still a lot of work to be done before cultured meat can really compete with a conventional meat product. So in addition to the very basic research that we fund, we also have grant categories for shorter term and higher risk, if you will, projects with more tangible deliverables, like this project which we started off at the University of British Columbia, which looked into creating a prototype for a scalable modular bioreactor for cultured meat production. And so prior to this, there was this conversation happening about how cultured meat would someday be produced in these big steel tanks like you would find in a beer brewery. And it was just left up to your imagination to kind of imagine what that would look like when applied to meat. But we wanted to really put that to test and built this prototype. And so this has not yet been tested, but we're looking forward to being able to test it in the coming months and sharing the findings of that with all of you guys. So all the work that we do, of course, is done in not just the spirit of openness and collaboration amongst researchers, but also it's being communicated in an honest and science-based manner, which is really important. We're sharing the progress of our work in that context of not really having a product to sell, and that honesty and being grounded in science means that we share, the exciting and positive developments that are happening in the space, but also the bad and the ugly. There are downsides, and as much as we would love for this to be a cruelty-free endeavor, animal products are still today implicated as a culture media for the cells. That's something that everybody in this field is really working hard to try and overcome, but it does remain the truth for now. And also just the fact that scientific research can be excruciatingly boring and repetitive and slow moving, and that's something that just really needs to be accurately communicated with the public. It doesn't move as fast as the business world would like, but that's how science is sometimes. So I would like to end with 2 quotes from Carl Sagan that I think capture the 2 takeaways from New Harvest that I would like to drive home. And so the first kind of speaks for itself. With insufficient data, it's easy to go wrong. We, as the cellular agriculture community, have been doing a lot of talking about the potential benefits of this new method of producing food and materials. And although it's great and that's been working really well for a few years, the time has come to really back that up with some hard evidence. So in the past couple of years especially, New Harvest has really been putting our heads down and doing that unglamorous work. And the second follows from that, which is if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first create the universe. And that speaks to the fact that as a new field, we're not just trying to, we're not going to be satisfied once a few prototypes are done or once one holy grail cultured meat product ends up on the market. We would like to see a larger, more vibrant and diverse array of choices of not just cultured meat products, but also cultured milk and eggs and leather and all the other possibilities that are possible with cellular agriculture. But to do so requires an entirely new foundation of knowledge that can be sustained and built upon well into the future. So we're approaching this work with a really broad view to all that's going to be necessary to seed that universe. So in conclusion, scientifically speaking, the progress in cellular agriculture may be slow, but it is being made. And New Harvest's contribution to this field is one that takes time and a lot of care to do right, especially because we're applying it to food, and food is so personal and sacred to people. So looking back at the last 5 years, a lot has happened, and it's great to see that there's so much interest still and so many new players and companies that are joining this space. I think that we can be confident that the next 5 years are going to be just as interesting, if not more, and I look forward to seeing what unfolds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin.
Thanks.
Thank you.